exciting guest today on Conduit News, Daniel Horowitz. He's a host of Conservative Review with Daniel Horowitz, and he's also a senior editor for Blaze News. He's joining us today on Conduit. I'm ready to pick your brain, Daniel. There's so much that we can talk about. Really appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us.
Great to be with you in Arkansas.
Before we get started and jump in all of these different topics, for our viewers, a lot of them will be familiar with you, but just first tell us about your work there at Blaze, your daily podcast that's streamed on X as well. I watch it when I can. Just tell our viewers a little bit about yourself.
Sure. What's relevant to you guys in Arkansas is that so many people that focus on national politics, they think that Washington, D.C. is the Super Bowl, and that's where we're going to solve everything. So what I've done, whether it's through my books, my daily columns and writings, and my podcast, I focus on the issues that matter in the way they matter, but most importantly, at the time and place they matter. And a lot of these national issues, believe it or not, we can solve, or at least we could sometimes in a defensive posture deal with them at the state and local level. State and local government is not just about garbage collection and parochial issues. A lot of the things that ail us, aside from really foreign policy, can be dealt with at a state level. There is always a state angle. So of recent, my biggest concern has been taking a look at states like Arkansas and saying, out of Washington and the Republican Party, we constantly hear this refrain that we can't do anything. We're stymied. Narrow majority in the House. We don't have a 60-vote supermajority filibuster-proof Senate. Well, the federal judiciary is saying we can't do this. And we've been hearing constantly what we can't do. So I'm saying, well, wait a minute. Okay, well, let's look at Arkansas. You have Republicans dominating. You have an 81-19 majority in the House, a 29-6 majority in the Senate. So there's no filibuster excuse. There's no narrow majority. We should be running up the score on medical freedom, on cutting spending, on weaning people off welfare, on ordered liberty, low crime, anti-woke, stuff, whether it's social conservatism, fiscal conservatism, land ownership. The Green New Deal should be a non-starter in a red state, but in fact, they're actually turbocharged, particularly in the red states, and I'm sure we're going to get into all that. Yeah. So my focus is to take some of the national issues and say, look, if we can't, push legislation or complete the cycle of passing legislation and Congress getting the president to sign it, we should at least be able to do it in a state like Arkansas.
Yeah, I agree. And that's something that we talk about here as well. And a lot of times, people don't really pay attention to state issues. Like you said, they know a lot about what goes on in DC and with, their congressmen and that sort of thing. But when you drill down to state government and local government, they're like, oh, I'm not really familiar with that. Yep. And our stance is, there's more to do here, and that can affect you yep. and your family and your wallet on the state level than federal. So I think that's a really good point. Just broadly, what would you give the state of Arkansas, from A to F on maybe legislation and where we're going on conservative policies and platforms? How do you see Arkansas?
Sure. So, grading on a curve, I'd say it's somewhere around a B minus, just because every state except for Florida, it does not have leadership that wakes up every day and says, how do we orient every lever of power towards a conservative bent, not just statewide, but even leaning in against big urban centers that you're finding. It just doesn't exist, and it should exist in 20 to 25 states. Yeah. With that said, compared to Florida, I would give it a D. But yeah. Relative to other states, you are somewhere in the middle. And I think you did beat out Florida by a month or two in passing first state to pass transactional gold, which if we get that implemented, will make currency accessible to the average person, not just big central banks, that they could transact $5, $10, $20, $50 transactions, basically pegging their own accounts, their own money to a real currency, to gold, almost having your own de facto gold standard. That was great. passed 10 commandments in the schools, no cell phones, had the affirmative action bill. I think you did accomplish more than some of the other states that I deal with. With that said, we could talk about obviously spending and immigration enforcement and the Green New Deal and special interests politics. There's a lot of room to grow into
Yeah.
making Arkansas what I call a political kill zone for left-wing policies, as it should be with an 81-19 majority.
I agree. And I think that's something that people kind of scratch their heads at here in Arkansas. It's like, we have this Republican supermajority, we have, a Republican governor. And when you look at especially this last legislative session, you mentioned that we should be leading in medical freedom, things like that.
Yep.
Daniel, we couldn't even get a fluoride bill passed. And that fluoride bill, all it did was remove a mandate, just
Yep.
simply remove the mandate of fluoride in your water. And Republicans fought that tooth and nail. And, people have said, well, what do we need to have? Like, how much more conservative does the legislature need to be before we start passing legislation that aligns with our principles? I mean, like you mentioned, it's an 81, 82% majority. What does it need to look like?
Yeah, I mean, you have the Florida Surgeon General, Dr. Ladapo, going around the state to all the localities, driving the narrative, campaigning against forced medication. Obviously, you need a bill really getting rid of all vaccine mandates. What we've
Yeah,
learned from COVID is that it is never scientifically, legally, and morally sound to force person A to get something to accommodate B, because by definition, if it works, then that person could avail themselves of it, and that's fine. We should be doing that. I mean, you have a great bill actually that I use nationally from Brian King, SB 6, that tries to go a step further and obviously federal statute absolves, unfortunately, most vaccines of liability for negligence, but at least trying to do what some of these anti-fentanyl laws are doing to hold accountable any pharmaceutical executive and official for a company that works to hide, conceal, or obfuscate any documentation about injury, about
yeah,
dangers and dangerous side effects of a vaccine. These are things we should be looking towards, and we can get through a list. I mean, I got a 20-page list of, national issues to fight at a state
mm,
legislative level. So I would say, for those that are looking towards Congress coming back after Labor Day and, oh, this is the Super Bowl, they already told us that, you
yeah,
know, the one bill that they could pass with 51 votes in the Senate was, kind of mediocre, couple good things here. It wasn't generational changing that reflected the seriousness of the mandate. There's a lot of
yeah.
excuses. We could debate about whom to blame or not blame. But what is clear is that imagine if we woke up one day and you had an 81-19 majority in the United States Senate. Well, you have that right now. Go down the gambit of issues, and we should be asking why we can't get them passed. And I think fundamentally, your problem in Arkansas is no different from really every red state until DeSantis changed the governing paradigm in Florida, in that you might have the people are culturally conservative. And
Hmm.
I think a lot of the elected Republicans in the executive legislative branch, certainly not all of them, but a lot are somewhat conservative. But that stops at the water's edge of special interests. And
Yeah.
that is the albatross around your state. Tyson's, JB Hunt,
Walmart.
companies like that, they run the state, not the majority sentiment of the people.
Well, and going back to the vaccine bill or the fluoride bill, all of these were, of course, in Senate Public Health. And you have the chair of Senate Public Health. Her family is, her husband's a doctor. There are tons of healthcare industry ties there. And, it was hard to even get a bill heard a lot of times in
Yep.
Senate Public Health because of those special interests and the lobbyists being able to have such influence. And also, they're looking out, as far as the Senate Public Health chair, she's looking out for her own personal interests. I mean, their livelihood. And so, how do you work around you see, especially this past legislative session, with the Republican majority, we saw more legislation with, you know, uh, corporate welfare handouts,
Yep.
growing government, mandates, tax breaks, for specific industries, economic development bills, appropriation bills, which is an astronomical amount. There's such a stronghold here in Arkansas
Yep.
and with special interest groups. What do you suggest? What do you recommend? How can we work around that for effective change?
So the reason there's two primary reasons why red states aren't red. They're slightly more pro-life and pro-gun, but
Yeah.
certainly not fiscal conservative. And in fact, we find even things that if you survey your average Republican voter in Arkansas and similar heartland rural majority states, you mentioned the Green New Deal. Oh, that's crazy. We don't want that. Yet it's actually more evident in red states because they have more land that's being gobbled up for that.
Yes.
And the reason is there's two reasons. It's federal funding. The
Hmm.
addiction to federal funding is the problem, and then um the corporate interest. Because in many respects, you go to the Dakotas, you go to Idaho, you go to Arkansas, these smaller states, if anything, the big employers of the state overpower the politics even more than a California, a New York, or maybe, if you want to pick a red state, a Texas or a Florida. They really have an inordinate sphere of influence
Yeah.
and we saw this throughout COVID, where the hospital systems, the university systems are often the biggest employers in a given state, especially if it's a small state. And the legislators kind of knew the COVID stuff was wrong, but they didn't stand up to it. So a couple things here. Obviously, you have to have blunt force trauma because on the one hand, all the lobbyist special interests are one way. They may as well be
Mhm.
blue states. They're
Yeah.
same priorities as blue states. But the broad sentiment of the public is against that. So the idea is to connect the majority sentiment to the politicians, to
Okay.
the outside game, to the inside game. To your point earlier, the problem is most people, if they would only know what these guys are doing, the bad bills they push or the good bills that we had the opportunity to pass that they kill, they'd be up in arms. But who's there telling them? So
Yeah.
kudos to you guys. First of all, I think we should have a conduit news serving as a conduit for the people into what is a closed profession. Part of the
Yeah.
problem is, look, I even rattled off a couple good bills you guys passed, and I don't want to take
Hmm.
anything away from that. But often they'll have a carefully orchestrated session. They'll do a couple good things. And I think the Ten Commandments is a great one. Look, we all support it, but it's kind of cosmetic. It's literally cosmetic, it's symbolic, and I'm all for
Yeah.
it. And they'll get two or three of these things, rile up the people with, evince the image of a conservative, but then
Hmm.
the real essence of what determines the future of the state, the demographics, the immigration, the land usage, things like that, they're
Yeah.
horrible on. And
Yeah.
it's a matter of exposing it. See, if you're in a blue state, you could expose it, but there's nothing you can do about it. You're not going to have enough power. You have to allure the broad sentiment of the people against it. Relatedly, and the second thing is, you really need an executive. It's very hard to do this just from kind of fighting one by one, legislator by legislator.
Hmm.
For example, with health, you're absolutely right that we found almost every red state. You look at the chairman of the health committee, both chambers, they're indistinguishable
Yeah.
from the Democrats. I mean, I believe I won't mention the name, but I believe this is true even in Florida in the Senate Health Committee. It's one of those type of industry people.
Yeah.
But you have a governor and his appointees driving the narrative, pushing for what the grassroots want, serving as that bully pulpit. People might say, well, a governor just kind of like constitutionally, yes, a governor sits at a desk and signs or opts to veto a bill. But
Hmm.
politically, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Politically, if you have the governor's party in the legislature, that individual is the head of the party, kind of what Trump is federally, at least to some degree, that governor is going to be like that, wield that sort of influence. And there's no middle ground. There's no like, okay, we have a wind and solar land grab fight. We have a carbon capture fight. We have a data center fight. I'm just picking land ownership, but we could
Yeah.
go on many other issues. And I'll kind of lurk around in the background, not really take a position. Some of my lobbyists and donors are part of the problem. I won't fight it, but I won't join it. That's not going to cut it. We need governors that are more proactive.
Well, and to your point, and we've written about this is something Conduit has talked about for a very long time, is the governor the head of the party? And we saw this with Asa whenever he was in office. First term, the legislators could not, bend a knee fast enough for whatever Asa wanted. Second term, they, were a little bit more independent from his office. You may remember, the SAFE Act. Asa was, adamantly opposed to that. He vetoed it when it passed. The legislature overrode that. So you saw a little bit, but that's where we are now in Arkansas. And the legislators are hearing from their constituents, these grassroots groups, about what they want, whether it's, private property rights, elimination of the state income tax, um, election integrity, things like that. And the legislators are hearing that, but yet they are they are taking their cues from the governor. And
Yeah.
and that's a really difficult thing to do, is to have these legislators as they should be separate, but actually act separate from the governor's office. And we're dealing with that pretty badly here, Daniel.
Yeah. I mean, look,
Because we don't have a
obviously,
DeSantis. We don't have someone out there. DeSantis is, like you said, he's driving the narrative, but
every
it's
day
every
you
day.
see you see the press conferences, and whether it's
Yes,
illegal immigration, whether it's speaking out against the special interests.
yes,
Look, here's what I'd say you have in a governor. Um, Huckabee Sanders is, leaps and bounds beyond what you
yes.
just mentioned.
Absolutely. Well, and
Um,
she, her first session with the education freedom accounts and school choice, she's done some really great big things that we support here at Conduit. But overall, there's so much more that could be done.
so here's the thing. There's the baseline Republican issues that get you on the map as just a baseline Republican. You guys weren't even doing that because you had a
Yes,
progressive governor.
a hundred
You know,
percent.
is Sarah, well, is Huckabee Sanders a conservative? Yes, I believe she is. But a lot of people are, Mike Tyson used to say, everyone has a plan until they're punched in the face. The question is, what happens when you're dealing with that political combat? And like I said before, the problem is special interests. A
Yeah,
lot of people are conservative until it meets special interests. The unique thing about Florida is it was the first time we've had a governor. And again, I actually think Huckabee Sanders is in the top five. I
yeah,
think she would be in anyone's top five. Now, take it for what it is, because most Republican governors are horrible. But they're just, I mean, they just view it as a
yeah,
monopoly board to
right.
parcel out favors. It's not ideological. They don't feel a sense of pride that we need to preserve the land and culture of a red state. They just don't see it that way. Um, this economic development thing is really the albatross. So rather than making the state broadly, culturally, and fiscally desirable, meaning abolish property taxes, if you can, swing also abolishing the income tax or making it as low as possible, having no special favors, a broad pro business climate, but not any special land use, regulatory, or tax favor for any one particular industry or company. Make it, desirable. So, for example, DeSantis focused a lot on quality of life, homelessness, porch piracy, street crime, the marijuana stuff. So it's like, look, it's going to be a great place for business. But when it comes to special interests, it's like this is a no-fly zone. We're just
Mhm.
not doing that. And unfortunately, these guys like doing the shortcuts. Okay, so we're going to keep people dependent, big government, big welfare. You have a big welfare problem in Arkansas, rather
Yeah.
than, and I want to get to that, how to work to get people off of it, and then just meet with special interests behind the table and just create jobs. Like
Yes.
this Keynesian mentality. But life doesn't work this way. So one of the things they're doing now is they're taking, so it's very interesting. God rejuvenates the world every day. Okay. God rejuvenates resources. We discover more
Mhm.
oil, more people. God creates people.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, there's one thing God doesn't create more of for whatever reason, and that is land. We are
Yeah.
stuck with the land we have. We have this multifactorial assault on America's heartland with wind, solar, data centers gobbling up an inordinate, appalling amount of land that is exponentially greater than the amount of land we use for nuclear, natural gas, coal power plants that give us power. These things give nothing or suck out power. You might have a speculative, you know, hope of what
Yeah.
supercomputers will create with other things. But in terms of power, the data centers will suck out more power and water than the entire usage of the state of Arkansas with its population, businesses, and industries put together, right? So we can't tell them, look, we're going to offer you tax breaks. We're going to rezone unnaturally rezone ag land and residential land that we do not do for other industries. That is not natural. That is not free market. Any industry, like this is what we learned from solar and wind. If you cannot exist and thrive within the current natural framework, the framework of the tax structure, the framework of the regulatory structure that every other industry has to abide by, or the framework of land usage. I have a lot of technological ideas that would require, I don't know, my son likes fixing up cars. I want to create a car repair shop on my residential street. Well, you can't do that. You got to find a way to do that in an appropriate
Right.
way. That is not capitalism. And I
Right.
think a lot of this is what separates a handful of Freedom Caucus people, DeSantis, and one or two others versus every other Republican. I want to make it clear. I don't think your governor is any worse than 90% of other Republicans. They don't seem to understand this. And you cannot weigh the quality and beauty of Arkansas's land and ranch land and farming land in its weight in gold. That
Yeah.
needs to be preserved. And if anything needs so many favors to thrive, it's not just that it's unfair and it's crony. Worse than that, it means that your product is not viable. That's what the COVID vaccines were. Without government mandating, subsidizing, marketing, absolving of liability, and monopolizing the public square to get it across the finish line, what that did is it absolved it of
Yeah.
the natural requirement to go through that trial and error process to better the product. Same thing with solar, wind and EVs. They were given shortcuts. So I fear that's the problem with the data centers. You guys have to make it work within that structure. You are in a fight for your life when it comes to land usage and ownership, and that's something you guys really really need to focus on.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. Right now, Little Rock, the capital city, they're in basically this bidding war over $1 billion data mining center. And as I told you before we began, these two cities can't, they can't decide who wants to give the most incentives and tax breaks to this company coming here. And 2023 legislation, 2025 legislation here in Arkansas really opened the door for a lot of these data mining centers to come in. And to your point, that should be the exact opposite of what, especially Arkansas conservative legislators should be doing. They should not want to, siphon off land to special interest into this data mining company that really can't come in and support itself. In fact, it's going to just suck everything out of the community, which we're
Yep.
seeing with these, crypto. There was one built, maybe not West Memphis, but somewhere over that area after 2023 legislation, and just what the communities are saying about these centers being built and really in rural areas. It's
Yes.
it's hard it's heartbreaking to
It's
see.
heartbreaking.
I don't understand why those who espouse conservative ideals and principles go along with it. I don't know how they sleep at night. And
I
then now
don't.
we're also seeing just this, rapid expansion and growth of wind farms, and they're popping up everywhere, all over beautiful Northwest Arkansas. And
You think of the
thankfully,
Ozarks, imagine we just went to West Virginia. There's a part of it that you literally cannot witness a sunset anymore. Every single mountaintop, like Deuteronomy 12:12,
hmm,
every mountaintop is full of idols. And,
yeah,
and you can't do that. That is not natural, even if it did produce, which of course most of the time they're not even spinning, and they require more oil just to get them built and operating than the commensurate amount of energy they produce. This has got to stop the crony land grabs. And, every conservative influencer under Biden, Agenda 2030, they're going to come do this and
I
take your
remember.
land, and you're not going to have ranches, and you're going to own nothing and eat bugs. And then you have it happen to the nth degree. We're in the Super Bowl of this. I mean, take the worst conspiracy about Agenda 2030, and it doesn't
Yeah.
match what I could have conceived with these data centers, and it's being done under Republican support. And I pass through in West Virginia, and I'm sure you have that there. I see kind of, poor properties and homes with these signs, no data center complexes. And I'm thinking, those were exactly the forgotten men that this supposed populist movement from 10 years ago was supposed to represent. And now we have this ultimate elite cronyism with government thick as thieves with big tech, the wealthiest companies in the history of the universe, Meta and Microsoft, $4 trillion companies bigger than the UK's entire stock exchange,
Yeah.
are getting special favors. The government's giving them federal land, exempting them from regulations that even, ironically, the power plants that are needed to power them and us are not exempt from. Put it this way, I want you to understand, over the last 4.5 years, we've had only two nuclear reactors come online. We've
Hmm.
had zero, obviously, zero coal power plants built, and zero oil refineries built in America. 10, 12 natural gas power plants built. So, I mean, this is the stuff that powers America, barely any progress.
Right.
Over that same period of time, 4.5 years, we have had 265 data centers already built. Um, Half of them AI, half of them over 50 megawatts, many of them over 100 megawatts. Now, for your listeners to understand, it's not a perfect conversion, but when you think of 100 megawatts, think for every 100, the daily power daily household power use equivalent of 100,000 homes. So they now are the ones they're working on now, like West Memphis. They're kind of cagey, and I don't think they're public about it, which is a big problem. They're not even disclosing the megawatts, but a
Yeah.
lot of them are between 500 or a gig. A gig would be the equivalent of 1 million households. Now, here's the deal. They'll look you in the eye and say, oh, no, it's self-sufficient. We have the power. Wait a minute. Right now, before any of this hyperscale is built, right now, we have crushing electricity rates across
Hmm.
the nation from the existing data centers, and also just from Biden's Green New Deal weakened, with the solar and the wind, weakened our infrastructure so much, and we haven't been building stuff that works. And
Yeah.
that's not Trump's fault. He's coming in. But the point is, you need to rebuild that first. You need to deal with the people and their struggle with electricity rates. Yet you're looking me in the eye and telling me we have enough electricity to double our demand. Well, if we had that we could just pull out of a rabbit out of our hat, why haven't we been doing it for the people broadly?
So
It's
true.
really a farce.
Yeah, that's so true. And with, with these wind farms specifically, there are some counties who are pushing back. I mentioned to you, they've recently passed 5-year moratoriums on these wind farms, but they're going to face an uphill battle with that. I mean, they've got a massive industry looking to cash their check in
The
for these wind
governor needs to back them. The governor and the legislature. Let me just say this. We started off talking about how what are some of the biggest national and international issues? The federal government working with the globalists, working with the elites, working with the Mag 7 companies, the big seven, Amazon,
farms.
Meta, Microsoft, Google, to basically, I don't want to, I mean, ruin our land.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
And
I mean,
this
you
is
can
a
be honest.
nightmare.
That's what it is. I mean, that's exactly what it is.
It looks hopeless.
Yeah,
But think about it. At a local level, the zoning laws, of course, there are times and places where they can get onerous, but you deal with that locally. The worst thing you can do is surrender your prerogative. That's the last weapon you have against the masters of the universe. We don't have any wealth. We don't have anything. We have had a venture socialist economy that has tipped the balance towards juicing up the stock market, juicing up housing prices,
housing market. Yeah,
creating an economy built on asset bubbles rather than broad wages and income. It's not a free market. We're left with nothing. The one thing we have that they don't is the land. We have the land. We have 80% of the land in the United States, and we have the people who support it.
yeah,
And the worst thing you can do is surrender that prerogative to say, no, we don't want something. We're not going to rezone farmland, um, ranch land, residential land for your dystopian vision. For the very reason I believe in that, and I see the play down the field, big tech sees the same thing. And that's why, if you remember, that number one thing that they were going to put in what was supposed to be our big, the first burst of mandate strength coming out of that
yeah.
election, what they called the BBB, Build Back Better, or whatever, that was Biden's bill, although maybe it's the same. Um, so
Yeah,
was two twin provisions. Localities are stripped of their ability to block carbon capture. I mean, think about that.
yeah,
Carbon capture. That's such a left-wing idea.
yep,
And regulate any aspect of AI, which is not
yeah,
just data centers. It's you just have criminality, privacy. There's a lot of things we have to deal with. And I hate to say it, but David Sachs in the White House was leading it. It wasn't some obscure rhino congressman. It was the White House that was
yeah,
pushing that. Thankfully, we took it out, but in the AI action plan, they are pushing to condition various grant programs to uh localities that embrace this stuff. So they're treating conservative counties like sanctuary, like we want to do sanctuary
mm-hmm.
cities that will harbor criminal aliens or things like that. I'm telling you, this is the number one issue.
Yeah.
We will never get that land back.
No, we agree, and we think that it's also one of the main issues of our time, and it's you said, well, the governor and the legislature needs to get behind these counties. Daniel, I just don't really see that happening, because, some of our Republicans are the ones who ran these bills, really just opening the door for these wind farms and data mining centers to come into Arkansas. And so, we may have a handful of legislators who get it,
Yeah.
but overall, it's an uphill battle. And one thing that you talked about the GOP, you talked about primary elections, and Conduit argues the way that either the Senate or that's all won in primaries, and so you've got to make sure that you get a platform true Republican conservative elected in the primaries. Because otherwise, we have open primaries, and we know with certainty they've told us that a Democrat will change over to Republican
Yep.
just so they can run and win in that particular district. At the Republican state convention back in 2024, the state party passed a rules change regarding closed primaries. Of course, the establishment here in Arkansas is very much against closed primaries.
Which is very
So,
telling.
well, and I interviewed oh oh gosh, I can't think of his name right now, but he was talking about closed primaries in Florida, and he said, why would Arkansas not have closed primaries? Matt Gates. He said, why would Arkansas not have closed primaries? He said that's basically having open primaries is like handing the Democrats your playbook and say, hey, take over whatever you want. He said that's absurd that you guys don't have closed primaries. What is your thought about that? How can voters ensure that they are getting a
Yep.
true conservative in office? What would you recommend?
So there's really two things. Number one, we have found in states like South Dakota and Wyoming the success of forming unique caucuses with a unique brand that essentially goes to war with the party establishment. That they're unabashed and they're a tight-knit group. Because the problem you have is, and believe me, you're not unique. We had this in
Yeah,
the broader Great Plains, Western states, some Southern states, where okay, you have an 81 to 19, 29-6 majorities, but you don't. The problem is they wear our jerseys, they put on our jerseys, so everyone knows. The reason why I focus on 81 to 19 is because that shows you broadly, give or take, where the people are. The people
yeah,
don't want the Democrats. They know what comes behind that. So what they do is they artfully have Democrats run as Republicans or Republicans that, like I told you, they might be conservative somewhere in the recesses of their heart, but special interests loom much larger.
sure.
So
Yeah,
then they use the Democrats as a tool, like you said, where they have them do the dirty work. They evince the image of a conservative. They run on like, oh, Joe Biden stinks. Or, oh, we're going to stand for you. I'm pro-life. I'm pro-gun, and the typical thing. Now, think about it. If you're a dirtbag, in the back pockets of special interests, you're going to have more money, but you
yeah,
don't use that money to run on Agenda 2030 and how much we love the Green New Deal. You're going to run on our views. So you confuse the voters, they don't know, and then you come in there and people are very confused. What we've seen success is in these freedom caucuses where you have a group of people where it's trial by fire. You can't just put on a GOP label. Like, no, you have to show that you are going to stand up and you join it, and then you grow it slowly, and then people start wondering, wait a minute, why aren't you in the Freedom Caucus? Why aren't you in the
mm,
Freedom Caucus? So that allows us to create a party within a party where you don't have the ballot access problems because technically you run on the GOP party line,
yeah,
but in reality, people can then distinguish jerseys. So that's the first step. The second step is I have long felt that we need to abolish primaries. And I know that sounds weird, like, well, abolish primaries for
okay,
what? I don't think it's just a problem of open primaries. I don't mean to burst your bubble. I'm just going to tell
yeah.
you,
What
open
is it?
that's a no-brainer. Yeah, you need to close
Yeah,
that. But
yeah,
even a lot of states that have done that, so what? Okay, it's a closed primary. You have a Trump plus 50 legislative district. Okay, 10 Republicans run for it. Do you know who wins? The one with the most money.
yeah,
That guy every time he's going to run on the same things. Voters don't know who to vote for. If they're willing to lie, what are you going to do?
yeah,
My proposition is caucuses or conventions, that we should have nominees selected at conventions where it's the
mm,
activists who understand who you are. So you could have $1 million from Walmart and Tyson's and JB Hunt, and you could say all you want, but the activists, the listeners of Conduit News, know exactly who they are, what they've been doing, who's been down for the struggle, who's been with us. Nothing's perfect, but I'm saying whereas we almost never knock off incumbents,
mm.
never
Yeah, you're right.
in
You're
in,
right.
in primaries, and it's not just
Yeah,
open, even closed primaries.
yeah,
You know, at conventions, I'm not as familiar with Arkansas, but I could tell you in a state like Texas, okay? Forget about legislators. Let's
Hmm.
talk about Greg Abbott. I mean, you can't
Okay.
get a bigger 800-pound gorilla in the room than him. He is
Yeah.
running for a fourth term, the governor of the largest red state. I mean, there's
Yeah.
no way you could beat him, right?
Well, you look at the
If he,
legislature and they're like wheels off right now.
yeah, but I'm just but forget about the
Yeah.
legislators.
Yeah.
Greg Abbott, if he were to stand for re-election before the convention, if the
Uh-huh.
convention delegates, rather than just your average person, where you can flood the airways with lies and mailboxes with, oh, well, I'm a conservative, if they would choose, Abbott would go down and would be defeated by a no-name
Hmm.
random person, like even not a high quality candidate. Yet, if you take that to a primary, like I have a friend running against him, he'll win 80-20.
Hmm.
And this is the lesson that ultimately, again, you need to create caucuses among the few conservatives. You do have a handful
Yeah.
in
You
one
do.
body more than the other
Yes.
that you need to cultivate into a caucus where they serve as a force multiplier. You have a staffer that could do research. You work with grassroots organizations. You campaign all year round. Like another thing you need too is it's tough because legislators in Arkansas are barely paid. It's very
Hmm.
part time, but they got to treat it like a full time job.
Right.
Even in off season, they need to engage in oversight. You're not just a vote, you're a voice.
Yeah.
Okay? You are a legislator. You could do media hits and sign letters saying this that the Department of Health is doing is unacceptable. The welfare department, right? Go down the list. Public Works, what they're doing, what transportation is doing. We should have a political kill zone
Hmm.
for any left-wing policy in Arkansas. When you see it pop up, you should have a group of members on it right away. And then that adds pressure to the governor and her cabinet to respond.
I do think that they are, I will give them this credit. They are good at that when it comes to Democrat policies, but what we call the low-hanging fruit. And,
Yeah.
we're the social issues,
Men
they're
and female
very,
sports.
yeah, I mean, and to Conduit, that's low-hanging fruit. That's, kind of appealing to a very particular voter. And yes, it's important, but when you're over here spending so much money
Yeah.
and easing regulations and getting rid of, oversight and transparency on how the government spends our money, that weighs so much more than the Ten Commandments ever would in schools.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so they are really good at those social issues, but the stuff over here, I mean, they're playing in that all day long. And but to your point, I do think that Arkansas does need a Freedom Caucus, and I think that would be really fun to see developed and to see what would happen.
Absolutely. No, I mean, you need a core group of people. We have seen the success. Wyoming was a cesspool. Wyoming was worse than Arkansas.
Hmm.
And within 2 cycles, the Freedom Caucus took over the House. They have a progressive Republican governor and he's gotten so bad. I mean, he literally supports he calls it, I think, carbon negative. He supports the transgender agenda. I mean, even low hanging fruit.
Wow.
He's a
Yeah.
total leftist. I mean, this is
Yeah.
how much we've been sleeping in red states. You have people like Governor Mark Gordon in Wyoming that get elected being pro transgender, but the people don't know about that until he quietly, greases the skids for the policies. Big COVID fascist. And the legislature this session, they were so compelling. He was forced to allow a lot of things to become law. He didn't
Hmm.
sign it, but he was too scared to veto it. And this is what you need to do. And I would say, obviously, with Huckabee Sanders, she is much better than some of these other governors. I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of potential to work with, but she's not going to stand up to the special interests on her own. To be fair, Everyone, oh, I'm going to stand up to the special interest. Everyone campaigns like that. And there is only one governor. Let me give you an example. Every Republican hates illegal immigration, right?
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
except for all the ones taking jobs.
Yeah.
Meaning, when you actually distill it, it's only the ones that are like they call the worst of the worst. But everyone else they want to keep. And I'm not
Right.
I'm not even getting into legal immigration and visas. Forget it.
Yeah.
They're all
Yes.
for that because all the businesses
Yeah.
are for that.
Yeah.
So
Look at Walmart and Tyson.
exactly. So, the joke is, I don't know if you've ever seen the 287G map of law enforcement agencies that are mandated, that are cooperating. And not just that, in Florida, they're doing what's called 1182. It's a different provision where even outside of the jails, the state highway patrol and all the state and local agencies have been deputized to serve as ICE agents. So why isn't that being done in states like Arkansas? I'll tell you why it's not being done. Because they don't want to get rid of the ones working in ag. Whereas in Florida, they do want to, that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
That's where you need to go. And I do want to indulge that issue for a moment because one of the most important things you guys could do is criminalize illegal immigration at a state level and pass laws demagnetizing benefits, schooling, anything like that. And the reason is so important is this: Trump's not going to be president forever.
Yeah.
Democrats are going to come back in. And what we find with the pendulum swing every time is, think about Obama. He opened the border, but then, what Biden did was 10 times worse. You know what's coming on the backside of this. And there's
Yeah.
nothing we can do. It's a equally divided country. The
Right.
Democrats are going to come back. But starting with our thesis, what about the states that aren't subject to the Democrat pendulum swing, where you could rack up enduring victories?
Hmm.
We need a permanent standing deterrent in Arkansas against illegal immigration so that not if, but when the Democrats get back in and open up the border and heck, this time they'll land ships in Latin America and bring them in and fly them in. I mean, you can only imagine
Yeah.
what they're going to
Yeah.
do.
Yes.
You could say, look, you're not coming here. I mean, you might go to California, but you're not coming to this part of the country.
Yeah. Well, I hate to tell you this, but this past legislative session, another really good bill by Representative Wayne Long would have required a photo ID, mandatory ID requirement for illegal immigrants. And how dare you even suggest that legislation? Blah blah blah, miserably failed in the House. Um, I hear
And
you, and
schooling is a big one. Schooling is a big one. In Tennessee, they almost got it passed, but in the end, it got swatted down. But to basically say, look, at a minimum, we should be counting how many illegals are in each public school district. So that's number
yeah,
one, just to know
yeah,
that they're
yeah.
there. Now, there's a couple ways you could skin this cat. One legislative idea is say, look, you have to show a valid ID in order to get enrolled in the public school. I mean, think about it. You have to show ID for everything. This is the biggest state benefit you're getting. Now, so you're
Hmm.
not directly saying illegals can't come. Okay, you're
Right.
saying you need a photo ID state issue. Now,
Yes.
Arkansas
Yeah.
does not issue photo IDs to illegals.
Right.
Most red states except for Utah do not. So, boom, that's one way. Another way is saying if you stop short of wholesale barring them, at least say you have to pay whatever it is, $8,000, whatever the tuition would be. And excuse my ignorance, I'm forgetting your far northwest county.
Benton.
Benton, yeah,
Yeah.
Benton. I remember seeing, and I don't have it. I apologize. I don't have it in front of me. Recently, from Center for Immigration Studies, they have a map of percentage of foreign born in school enrollment, and it was
Yes.
shockingly high in that
Yeah.
county.
That's where we
And
are.
and
We're in Washington. We neighbor Benton.
yeah, and that is not fair. That you should have, you know, public schools flooded with foreign nationals because of some gritty industries that want slave labor, and then they have their kids, and you watch these ag districts that you would think would be very sort of native, rural. You have we're not talking about, New York City here, okay?
Yeah.
And yet the foreign-born population in the school system is pretty high for what the county is. And I remember Benton being one of those. And that's something that I think needs to be tackled because, again, even if the Trump administration does a 10 out of 10 job federally, Democrats are going to come back in, reopen the border. You need a standing deterrent to dissuade them from coming to your state.
Yeah, that's great, Daniel. And I think, as you were saying that, and then Democrats being back in power, I can't help but think, and I know that I need to let you go, but I want you to speak to this. There's so much more I could talk to you about and ask you about. But we're seeing right now these, Republican leaders, whether it's, state level or federal, put policies in place. And, someone argue, is that even constitutional, some of the things that you're doing, such as, a crime to burn a flag or now allowing 600,000, Chinese students to come in. Some of these things, just as a Republican, you're like, I feel like, I'm in the twilight zone. But at times it feels like what's lost is that they won't always be in power. And these same
Yes.
policies or what they're putting in place right now will eventually, the tables will turn. And what will that look like? And,
Yes.
before I let you go, maybe just some encouragement for our
Look,
viewers when, when they're looking at the landscape of things right now.
look, I think your existence is some encouragement that we do have an increasing focus on this thesis that, wait a
Yeah.
minute, it's not winner take all. Thank God, with as much of our Constitution destroyed, we still do have Madison's design in place that we are not subject to winner take all. Be like, well, what do you mean? If they win, they win. No, you remember Arkansas. People will laugh at Arkansas. Oh, you just have what is it? 2 million people less, about one and a
Yeah.
half million.
No, it's about what, three? Yeah, about 3 million now.
Okay, so excuse me, you're going to
Yeah.
say, but three
Yeah.
million.
Yeah.
Well, oh, it's a tiny state. With 3 million people, you have as much sovereign control over that distinct unit of government as the left does in California with over 40 million people. That's the bottom line. So what seems hopeless, oh my gosh, what could we do? Like I said, if the 81 to 19, 29 to 6 tells you roughly, not in every issue, but roughly where the overwhelming majority sentiment is. The people want what we want. We
Yeah.
just need to connect that to the political leadership so that the political representation reflects the orientation of the state. And if you do that, I mean, we have our guiding light. It's not perfect there, but look at what happened in Florida. I mean, you guys consider Little Rock like, oh, that's the urban leftist. Give me a break. Florida, it's the third largest state, very diverse, huge urban areas, Miami, Tampa, Orlando, Jacksonville, and yet he was able to govern more conservatively than anyone in history and take a 50-50 state and turn it into a plus 20 because he culturally denuded the special interests, not just of their bad policies, but of their ability to use that to actually push liberal stuff. And he's
Yeah.
like open, like, I don't want you guys here. Like, we don't
Yeah.
want
It's
that.
awesome.
And
That's so
and that's
awesome to see.
that's the paradigm. If it could be done in Florida,
Yeah.
there's no reason it can't be done in Arkansas, which voted for Trump by an even larger
Right.
margin over Kamala Harris, right?
Yeah.
So that tells you where people are. People didn't vote for, we could talk about what the Trump administration is or isn't doing, but what the people who voted for him
Hmm.
clearly were showing is that they want this. Now, the Trump administration might say on certain things, well, we don't have the votes in Congress. All right. But in Arkansas, you should have those votes. Go down the list of illegal immigration, of green energy stuff. You could make it a kill zone like the counties are doing. You could permit things you don't or prohibit things you don't want. You could right so many wrongs that we
Mm.
don't have the ability to do at the national and international level. on pretty much you give me the issue and I'll show you uh a state angle. I could even show you on visas, oh, visas, the states have no control, right? Well, they don't. But you know what? There is nothing stopping Arkansas from writing a law saying that the University of Arkansas system cannot bring in foreign labor unless they certify like it's a French teacher or something that's needed. I'm just giving you one example
Yeah.
there. Like, oh,
Yeah.
wow, I didn't think about that. There's a lot you can do on things that are seemingly national issues. You could find at least partial angles, often foolproof ways of creating a utopia for ordered liberty and a kill zone for dystopian liberalism.
Well, Daniel, I think the appetite is certainly here. I know amongst the voters and the grassroots organizations that we speak to, they are wanting that. They want to see that change here in Arkansas. I hope that you can come back on Conduit again really soon because I probably have two extra pages of questions that I wanted to get with you on and then pick your brain about some of these things that you're talking about that can be applied here at the state level. I know people would love to hear about it. So I hope that you will join us again on Conduit.
Absolutely. God bless, and thanks so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Daniel.